hear a woman called Jan phoning a man about their local conservation group.
Hello?
Oh, hello. My name's Jan. Are you the right person to talk to about the Buckworth Conservation Group?
Yes, I'm Peter. I'm the secretary.
Good. I've just moved to this area and I'm interested in getting involved. I was in a similar group where I used to live. Could you tell me something about your activities, please?
Of course. Well, we have a mixture of regular activities and special events. One of the regular ones is trying to keep the beach free of litter. A few of us spend a couple of hours a month on it, and it's awful how much there is to clear. I wish people would be more responsible and take it home with them.
I totally agree. I'd be happy to help with that. Is it okay to take dogs?
I'm afraid not, as they're banned from the beach itself. You can take them along the cliffs, though, and children are welcome.
Right.
We also manage a nature reserve, and there's a lot to do there all year round. For example, because it's a popular place to visit, we spend a lot of time looking after the paths and making sure they're in good condition for walking.
I could certainly help with that.
Good. And we have a programme of creating new habitats there. We've just finished making and installing nesting boxes for birds to use, and next we're going to work on encouraging insects. They're important for the biodiversity of the reserve.
They certainly are.
Oh, and we're also running a project to identify the different species of butterflies that visit the reserve. You might be interested in taking part in that.
Sure. I was involved in something similar where I used to live, counting all the species of moths. I'd enjoy that.
Another job we're doing at the reserve is replacing the wall on the southern side, between the parking area and our woodshed. It was badly damaged in a storm last month.
Okay.
Then, as I said, we have a programme of events as well, both at the weekend and during the week.
Right. I presume you have guided walks. I'd like to get to know the local countryside as I'm new to the area.
Yes, we do. The next walk is to Ruston Island a week on Saturday. We'll be meeting in the car park at Dunsmore Beach at low tide. That's when the sands are dry enough for us to walk to the island without getting wet.
Sounds good.
The island's a great place to explore. It's quite small and it's got a range of habitats. It's also an ideal location for seeing seals just off the coast or even on the beach.
Okay. And is there anything we should bring? Like a picnic, for instance?
Yes, do bring one, as it's a full-day walk. And of course, it'll be wet walking across and back, so make sure your boots are waterproof.
I must buy a new pair. There's a hole in one of my current ones. Well, I'd definitely like to come on the walk.
Great. Then later this month, we're having a one-day woodwork session in Hopton Wood.
I've never tried that before. Is it okay for beginners to take part?
Definitely. There'll be a couple of experts leading the session, and we keep the number of participants down, so you'll get as much help as you need.
Excellent. I'd love to be able to make chairs.
That's probably too ambitious for one day. You'll be starting with wooden spoons, and of course learning how to use the tools. And anything you make is yours to take home with you.
That sounds like fun. When is it?
It's on the 17th from 10 a.m. until 3. There's a charge of £35, including lunch, or £40 if you want to camp in the wood.
I should think I'll come home the same day. Well, I'd certainly like to join the group. It sounds like...
If you were to ask which country the River Nile belongs to, most people would immediately say Egypt. A critical fact of modern Egypt's life is that most of the Nile is actually in Sudan. Egypt has always been wary of its huge southern neighbour, but for most of its history it has been by far the stronger of the two. But there was a moment, around 3,000 years ago, when for a century or so it all looked very different.
It really was the centre of a very powerful, vibrant civilization in the heart of Africa, Black Africa.
And it was one of the major civilizations of the ancient world, although it's always seen as being on the periphery of that world.
This week, I'm investigating the world around 700 BC. Even though populations were tiny, only about 1% of today's world population occupied the whole of the globe then, large-scale conflicts were frequent and bitter. War was everywhere, and one of the features of the period was the conquest of long-established centres of wealth and civilization by poorer peoples living on the edge. In the case of Egypt, this meant that the mighty land of the pharaohs was conquered and ruled by its southern neighbour, what is now northern Sudan, but was then called the Kingdom of Kush. I'm walking through the galleries of the British Museum, heading for a stone sphinx. Sphinxes, statues with a lion's body and a man's head, are creatures of myth and legend, but they're also one of the great symbols of Egyptian royalty and power. The most famous of all, of course, being the Great Sphinx at Giza. Here it is now, and compared with the one at Giza, this sphinx is very small. It's about the size of a spaniel. But it is particularly interesting, because it's not just a hybrid of a man and a lion, but a fusion of Egypt and Kush. It's made out of sandy grey granite, and it's beautifully preserved. The muscular lion's back, the mane of hair, and the powerfully outstretched paws are all classically Egyptian. But it's not a typical Egyptian pharaoh's face, because this man is unquestionably a black African, and this sphinx is the image of a black pharaoh. Hieroglyphics on the sphinx's chest spell it out. This is a portrait of the great King Taharko, the fourth pharaoh to rule over the combined kingdoms of Kush and Egypt. Kush occupied what is now the north half of Sudan. For thousands of years, Egypt had looked on its southern Kushite neighbour essentially as a rich but troublesome colony that could be exploited for its raw materials. There was gold and ivory and, very important, slaves. In this almost colonial relationship, Egypt was very much the master. But in 728 BC, the balance of power flipped. Egypt had become fragmented and weak, and the Kushite king Pianki took the opportunity to send his armies north, capture the cities of Egypt one by one, until finally the north was quashed, and the Kushites were in charge of an empire that ran roughly from modern Khartoum to modern Alexandria. And in order to govern this new state, they created a new national identity, a hybrid that would combine both Egypt and Kush. Taharko, represented in the BM Sphinx, is the most important of all the Kushite kings. He initiated a golden age for his immense new kingdom, and he succeeded largely because, rather than imposing Kushite customs on the Egyptians, he absorbed and adopted theirs. Even in Kush itself, Taharko built pyramids on the Egyptian model, and he worshipped the Egyptian god Amun. He restored temples in the Egyptian style, and his officials wrote in Egyptian hieroglyphics. It's a pattern that we see again and again in successful conquests. They use the existing symbols and vocabulary of power because those are the ones that are already familiar to the population. It makes sense to keep using a language of control that everybody is accustomed to accept. The Sphinx of Taharko, in its calculated mixture of the two different traditions, is not just a striking portrait of the Kushite ruler as a traditional Egyptian pharaoh. It's also a lesson in political method. And for a short period, that method worked brilliantly. This brief Sudanese conquest of Egypt is now very much a forgotten history. The official narrative of Egypt underplayed the Kushite disruption, blandly calling the reign of the Kushite kings the 25th dynasty, thus quietly incorporating them into an unbroken story of an eternal Egypt. But Kush's historical role is now being energetically reassessed, and Sudanese history, in some measure, rewritten. In the British Museum, we have a curator who has been central to this work of recovery and re-evaluation. Derek Welsby, a leading expert on the archaeology of the Sudan, has been digging along the Nile for many years. He's done a lot of work at Kawa, north of Khartoum, where this sphinx came from. It was made to go into a temple there that had been restored by Taharko. Derrick's description of the working conditions at his excavation give an idea of what this land would have been like for the Kushites.
Often it's incredibly hot on site. Even in the middle of winter it can be very hot, but sometimes early in the morning it's incredibly cold as well. It's like 4 or 5 degrees and then you've got a very strong wind. But by 11 o'clock it can be 35, 40 degrees, so it changes very dramatically. The temple that Taharqa built at Kawa is purely Egyptian in design. It was actually built by Egyptian workmen and architects sent by Taharqa from his capital at Memphis in Lower Egypt. But it was built in the heart of Kush. But the Egyptian influences are just a veneer over Kushite culture. The indigenous African culture continued right the way through the Kushite period. It used to be considered that the Kushites were just slavishly borrowing things from Egypt and just copying Egyptian models. But what we see, they're picking and choosing. They're choosing the things that are enhancing their view of the world, the status of their ruler and so on. And they're retaining many of their local cultural elements as well. And you see this particularly in the religion, because not only do you get the Egyptian gods like Amun, but you also get the major local Kushite gods such as Apedemak being worshipped sometimes in the same temples.
As originally placed in the temple, Taharqa's Sphinx would have been seen only by the ruler and by his closest circle, which would have included priests and officials from both Egypt and Kush. Coming upon it in an inner sanctuary, Kushites would have been reassured by its black African features, while Egyptians would have immediately felt at home with its peculiarly Egyptian iconography. Taharqa's Sphinx is a very sophisticated piece of political imagery, for it's not just a mix of north and south, it also combines the present with the long distant past. The form of the lion's mane and his ears closely resemble elements found in ancient Egyptian sphinxes as far back as the 12th dynasty. That's about 1,000 years before this. The message is clear. This black pharaoh, Taharqa, stands in a long line of great Egyptian rulers who have held dominion over all the lands of the Nile. Taharqa was eager to expand Egypt beyond Sinai and its northeast border, an aggressive policy that led to conflict with the Assyrian king Sennacherib, whose stone reliefs were the subject of the last programme. Around 700 BC, Taharqa allied himself with Hezekiah, king of Judah, and fought alongside him. But this challenge to the Assyrian war machine ultimately led to Taharqa's downfall. 10 years later, the Assyrians came looking for him, seeking the colossal wealth of Egypt, and although he repelled them that time, they soon returned. In 671 BC, they forced Taharqa to flee south to his native Kush. He lost his wife and his son to the enemy, and after more attacks from the Assyrians, he was finally expelled. In the long history of Egypt, Kushite rule was a brief interlude of not even 150 years. Yet it reminds us that the border between what is now Egypt and Sudan is a constant fault line, both geographic and political, that has frequently divided the peoples of the Nile Valley and frequently been fought over. We'll see that fault line again later in these programmes, because both the Roman and the British empires bloodily revisited this contested boundary between Egypt and Kush. Geography has determined that this will always be a frontier, because it's here that the first cataract breaks up the Nile into small rocky channels that are very hard to navigate, making contact between north and south highly problematic. For Africans, the Nile has never been just an Egyptian river, and it's claimed as fiercely by the Sudanese now as it was in the time of Taharqa. The Sudanese-born political commentator, Zainab Badawi.
Ideologically, I wouldn't say that there are any huge differences between the Sudanese and the Egyptian government, certainly, and there is a huge affinity between the people. I think that the biggest source of friction and potential tension between Egypt and Sudan has been in the Nile and how the waters of the Nile are used. The feeling that a lot of northern Sudanese might have is that the Nile actually, in a sense, runs obviously much more through Sudan than it does through Egypt. Sudan is the biggest country in Africa. It's the 10th biggest in the world, the size of Western Europe. It is the land of the Nile. And maybe there is a kind of slightly brotherly kind of resentment by the northern Sudanese that the Egyptians have, in a sense, kind of claimed the Nile as their own, whereas the Sudanese, in a sense, feel that they are the proper custodians of the Nile because, after all, most of its journey is through the territory of Sudan.
Zainab Badawi's words perhaps make it clear why the union of Egypt and Sudan just under 3,000 years ago was easier to achieve in the sculpted form of Taharka's Sphinx than in the unstable world of practical politics. Recovering the story of Kush has been one of the great achievements of recent archaeology, showing how an energetic people on the edge of a great empire were able to conquer it and appropriate its traditions.
You will hear a tour guide, Lou Miller, speaking to a group of people about a boat trip they are going to take around the Australian island of Tasmania.
So, hello everyone. My name's Lou Miller, and I'm going to be your tour guide today as we take this fantastic boat trip around the Tasmanian coast. Before we set off, I just want to tell you a few things about our journey. Our boats aren't huge, as you can see. We already have 3 staff members on board, and on top of that, we can transport a further 15 people, that's you, around the coastline. But please note, if there are more than 9 people on either side of the boat, we'll move some of you over. Otherwise, all 18 of us will end up in the sea. We've recently upgraded all our boats. They used to be jet black, but our new ones now have these comfortable dark red seats and a light green exterior in order to stand out from others and help promote our company. This gives our boats a rather unique appearance, don't you think? We offer you a free lunchbox during the trip, and we have 3 types. Lunchbox 1 contains ham and tomato sandwiches. Lunchbox 2 contains a cheddar cheese roll. And Lunchbox 3 is salad-based and also contains eggs and tuna. All 3 lunchboxes also have a packet of crisps and chocolate bar inside. Please let staff know which lunchbox you prefer. I'm sure I don't have to ask you not to throw anything into the sea. We don't have any bins to put litter in, but Jess, myself, or Ray, our other guide, will collect it from you after lunch and put it all in a large plastic sack. The engine on the boat makes quite a lot of noise, so before we head off, let me tell you a few things about what you're going to see. This area is famous for its ancient lighthouse, which you'll see from the boat as we turn past the first little island. It was built in 1838 to protect sailors, as a number of shipwrecks had led to significant loss of life. The construction itself was complicated, as some of the original drawings kept by the local council show. It sits right on top of the cliffs in a very isolated spot. In the 19th century, there were many jobs there, such as polishing the brass lamps, chopping firewood, and cleaning windows that kept lighthouse keepers busy. These workers were mainly prison convicts until the middle of that century, when ordinary families willing to live in such circumstances took over. Some of you have asked me what creatures we can expect to see. I know everyone loves the penguins, but they're very shy and unfortunately tend to hide from passing boats. But you might see birds in the distance, such as sea eagles, flying around the cliff edges where they nest. When we get to the rocky area inhabited by fur seals, we'll stop and watch them swimming around the coast. They're inquisitive creatures, so don't be surprised if one pops up right in front of you. Their predators, orca whales, hunt along the coastline too, but spotting one of these is rare. Dolphins, on the other hand, can sometimes approach on their own or in groups as they ride the waves beside us. Lastly, I want to mention the caves. Tasmania is famous for its caves, and the ones we'll pass by are so amazing that people are lost for words when they see them. They can only be approached by sea, but if you feel that you want to see more than we're able to show you, then you can take a kayak into the area on another day, and one of our staff will give you more information on that. What we'll do is to go through a narrow channel, past some incredible rock formations, and from there we'll be able to see the openings to the caves, and at that point we'll talk to you about what lies beyond.
Have you ever worked for a boss who thinks that having the word manager in his job title automatically makes him able to lead? If you have, you'll know that such managers make the worst kind of leader. The best leaders recognize that a position of authority is just one step on the path to becoming a great leader. They know that great leadership means always developing new skills. These blinks show you the ladder you have to climb if you want to be that great leader, including 5 steps you must take on the way. Position, permission, production, personal development, and the pinnacle. If you make it up these 5 steps, you'll become the type of leader that anyone will follow. Follow the 5 levels of leadership to become a true leader with a lasting impact. If you've ever had the pleasure of working under a great boss, you already know that having an inspiring leader can make a world of difference. Great leaders have the vision. That is, the ability to navigate a dynamic, fast-changing business world. A modern company is like a sailboat on a stormy sea. Like the captain, the leader knows how to navigate the stormy waters and chart the course to get to where you're going. After all, the steering wheel and sails can be operated by anyone on board, as long as there's a leader to set the right course. As you can see, having a visionary, forward-thinking leader is crucial. However, it may surprise you to learn that these kinds of leaders are made, not born. Pretty much anyone can be appointed to a leadership position, but that doesn't automatically give them influence or sway over other people. We've all experienced bosses who seem to think that their rank allows them to do anything they please, but leaders like that never manage to motivate their team or achieve the desired results. On the other hand, influential leaders know how to reach the right people, develop a good strategy, and get things moving. And as you'll hear in the following blinks, there are 5 distinct levels you have to pass in order to become that kind of effective leader. It's important to note that learning these leadership skills is like climbing a ladder. You have to master each step before you can climb higher. So keep listening to find out how to climb the leadership ladder and become a truly inspiring boss. Inspire others by bringing your personality and core values to your leadership role. Have you ever had a boss with lots of formal authority but no actual talent for leadership? If so, you've experienced a positional leader. Someone who thinks position alone gives them the power to command. Unfortunately, positional leaders waste energy and fail to get the best out of their subordinates. After all, when formal position is the only thing legitimizing your leadership, you have to spend all your time defending your authority. In fact, we often see positional leaders behaving like medieval rulers, obsessed with accumulating huge armies and castles to buttress their power. In real-world terms, imagine a manager obsessed with attaining the largest possible staff and the biggest budget, all in order to make themselves look important. Exacerbating the poor leadership, positional leaders have trouble giving their employees direction. They may order people around, but they'll never motivate them for long periods of time. In other words, subordinates will do only what is specifically expected and very little more. The lesson here is that instead of seeing position as your only goal, you should see it as a starting point. It's a chance to develop your own way of leadership and create lasting influence. Here's another way to think about it. Although you may have a defined position within the company, you still have to fill it with life by choosing core values and deciding to implement specific working practices. Ultimately, you can develop any kind of leadership style as long as it's effective and true to who you are. The former CEO of Southwest Airlines learned this lesson while observing the behavior of 2 court litigators. One was very diplomatic and calm. The other was aggressive and emotional. But despite the difference in style, both were outstandingly successful. He realized that you have to bring your own personality to the position. Build trust and positive relationships to make the most of your leadership. As we've learned, positional leaders waste energy protecting their own interests and power. The best way to break free from this type of leadership is by shifting the focus from ourselves to others. The advantages of being more outward-facing are manifold. Positive relationships and a pleasant environment raise energy levels and foster an enjoyable workplace. After all, consider what happens when you spend time with people you don't like. Most likely, it drains your energy and feeds a negative outlook. On the contrary, spending time with friends is like recharging your batteries. It makes us feel energetic and full of life. So, how do you build up these positive relationships? You have to value the people around you and treat them accordingly. You'll find that if you practice a positive mode of communication, you'll connect with others easily. To that end, imagine commanding a coworker in an aggressive way. He'll probably respond defensively. On the other hand, if you stay calm and gently ask for a favor, he'll probably be open to your message, making it more impactful. This kind of communication is crucial, because when people around you trust you and feel appreciated, they tacitly give you permission to lead them. In other words, people cling to leaders they can trust. Especially when your workplace is dealing with difficult situations, feeling that someone's looking out for everyone on the team strengthens ties. For instance, in the U.S. Marines, one of the core values is to leave no one behind, regardless of status. That's why when they go into combat, officers opt not to wear their insignias of rank. Not wearing this symbol sends a clear message. We are in this together. We live and die together, regardless of rank. And this ethos plays a key role in the organization's imposing reputation. A good team needs a good leader to chart the course to success. Focusing on others not only legitimizes your leadership, it also fosters greater productivity. First, it's important to recognize that an effective team isn't simply a collection of individuals. It's a finely calibrated balance of various skills and attributes. In other words, a team is greater than the sum of its parts, because all the strengths are fused together to balance out the weaknesses. For instance, think of a basketball team, which consists of specialized players each perfectly fulfilling the demands of their specific position. Members play in their own unique sweet spot, thereby maximizing strengths and minimizing weaknesses. This kind of collaborative action is also well suited to solving complex problems. Or as basketball coach John Wooden said, everyone who scores a basket has 10 hands. Meaning, each time an individual player scores, it's thanks to his teammates' contributions. But, of course, every good team needs a good leader. Someone who ensures that everyone's working together and heading in the right direction. And that leader is also responsible for identifying strengths and weaknesses. Bringing back the basketball analogy, you have to put your best defensive players in defense and the best attackers in offense. Furthermore, it's crucial for the team that the leader never loses sight of the big picture and charts a course toward the final destination. After all, even in sports, the final goal isn't so easy to identify. As in business, succeeding at basketball is way more complex than just winning the game. The coach has to ask himself, what strategy should we expect from the opposing team? What's their Achilles heel? How can I prevent the team from overexertion to save some energy for upcoming tournaments? In the business world, the leaders have to ask the same questions. Set an example for others and get the ball rolling by creating a wave of momentum. Change isn't easy, and that's why many of us prefer to live in the comfortable land of the status quo. But impactful leaders are different. They must know how to roll up their sleeves and get things moving. After all, a leader sets an example through his own actions. So if you perform aggressively or reluctantly, this attitude will translate into poor team performance. But if you show enthusiasm and drive, people will follow suit. For example, legend has it that once during the Revolutionary War, George Washington rode up to a group of soldiers who were having trouble raising a beam. Instead of helping directly, the commander first stood aside and shouted words of encouragement. But when he realized that the task exceeded the soldiers' strength, Washington dismounted his horse and joined the struggle. Soon enough, the group succeeded in lifting the beam. As you can tell from that example, a leader's actions can create momentum for change. It's really hard to go forward rapidly from a standing start, but when a leader acts prudently, he can create momentum to lead the team forward at full speed. To that end, imagine how exhausting it feels to swim against the tide. It's much easier to make progress by moving with it. That's exactly what Apple did. The once small company, fighting against the tide of companies like Microsoft and IBM, shifted the market direction by releasing products that were designed with the user in mind. With products like the iPhone, Apple shifted the tide, so that now other companies have to choose to move in the same direction or fight against it. So once you've brought your team into position and spearheaded the first steps, create some momentum and allow it to work in your favor. Developing your human resources is crucial for your company's long-term success. When you see success, you're just looking at a snapshot. Because under changing circumstances, even the most brilliant marketing strategy can falter. That's why an organization's biggest challenge is to sustain a high level of success. It's crucial to remember that any company's greatest resources are its people. After all, markets change, facilities deteriorate, supplies get used up, but people have the potential to grow and surpass themselves. And that's exactly why successful companies distinguish themselves by improving their people. That is, by giving them room to learn and grow. For example, in 1999, Fortune named Synovus Financial Corporation the best place to work in America. And looking back, the former CEO says that the award was only possible because the company always emphasized team building and people development. A true leader is like a mentor, focused on transforming the people around him and helping them grow. To this end, people development is one of the most important aspects of leadership. For example, the author observed that transformative leaders only put 20% of their effort in personal productivity. Meanwhile, the other 80% goes into staff development. Meaning, great leaders put their own advancement far behind the broader goal of building a phenomenal team. It's important to note that personal development isn't just good for the company. It's also a major human need. Fulfilling it will give your employees a sense of loyalty to the company, reducing possible interest in seeking opportunities elsewhere. As we've learned, people development is extremely important for the long-term success of an organization. And as a mentor, you have to find the balance between teaching your employees and empowering them to grow on their own. As you'll see in the next blank, that means you have to put some power in their hands. Developing future leaders is the key to a lasting legacy. Becoming a successful leader is a long process, but the rewards are great. Still, the journey never really ends, because a true leader keeps giving back by teaching others to become leaders too. There are a few reasons why that's important. First, having just one leader creates an organizational bottleneck. In other words, when just one person makes all the decisions, the rest of the company becomes passive and dependent. To demonstrate that point, the authors compare traditional leadership models to a herd of buffalo. Instead of blindly following a head buffalo, truly effective organizations are organized like a flock of geese, flying in a V formation and continually rotating who is at the head to oppose the wind. Here's another reason having just one leader doesn't make sense. When that person quits, how can anyone else be ready to take on the load? Before that time comes, it's crucial to create a culture of leadership within the organization and empower team members to become leaders themselves. How? First, invite your employees to sit down at the leadership table. Backed by trust and provided with a range of autonomy and responsibility, employees ready to lead can emerge. Developing future leaders is not only an organizational necessity, it's also part of your legacy. Because creating fellow leaders who can act autonomously and also rear their own new leaders will effectively reproduce your work to infinity. Consider the Socratic model. The ancient Greek philosopher's student Plato founded an academy that passed on knowledge to generations of students. Among these students was Aristotle, who later became an important mentor to Alexander the Great. And there's one more important benefit of teaching others. Seeing other people grow and follow in your footsteps is greatly rewarding. In fact, there's no better motivation.
You will hear two veterinary science students called Diana and Tim discussing their work placements and their course modules.
So, Tim, we have to do a short summary of our work experience on a farm.
Right. My farm was great, but arranging the work experience was hard. One problem was it was miles away and I don't drive. And also, I'd really wanted a placement for a month, but I could only get one for 2 weeks.
I was lucky. The farmer let me stay on the farm, so I didn't have to travel. But finding the right sort of farm to apply to wasn't easy.
No, they don't seem to have websites, do they? I found mine through a friend of my mother's, but it wasn't easy.
No.
My farm was mostly livestock, especially sheep. I really enjoyed helping out with them. I was up most of one night helping a sheep deliver a lamb.
On your own?
No, the farmer was there, and he told me what to do. It wasn't a straightforward birth, but I managed. It was a great feeling to see the lamb stagger to its feet and start feeding almost straight away, and to know that it was okay. Then another time, a lamb had broken its leg, and they got the vet in to set it, and he talked me through what he was doing. That was really useful.
Yes, my farm had sheep too. The farm was in a valley, and they had a lowland breed called Suffolks, although the farmer said they'd had other breeds in the past.
So were they bred for their meat?
Mostly, yes. They're quite big and solid.
My farm was up in the hills, and they had a different breed of sheep. They were Cheviots.
Oh, I heard their wool's really sought after.
Yes, it's very hard wearing, and they use it for carpets.
Right.
I was interested in the amount of supplements they add to animals' feed nowadays. Like, even the chickens got extra vitamins and electrolytes in their feed.
Yes, I found that too. And they're not cheap. But my farmer said some are overpriced for what they are, and he didn't give them as a matter of routine, just at times when the chickens seemed to particularly require them.
Yes, mine said the same. He said certain breeds of chickens might need more supplements than the others, but the cheap and expensive ones are all basically the same. So, did your farm have any other livestock, Diana?
Yes, dairy cows. I made a really embarrassing mistake when I was working in the milk shed. Some cows had been treated with antibiotics, so their milk wasn't suitable for human consumption, and it had to be put in a separate container. But I got mixed up, and I poured some milk from the wrong cow in with the milk for humans, so the whole lot had to be thrown away. The farmer wasn't too happy with me.
I asked my farmer how much he depended on the vet to deal with health problems. I'd read reports that the livestock's health is being affected as farmers are under pressure to increase production. Well, he didn't agree with that, but he said that actually some of the stuff the vets do, like minor operations, he'd be quite capable of doing himself.
Yeah, my farmer said the same, but he reckons vet skills are still needed. Now we've got to give a bit of feedback about last term's modules. Just short comments, apparently. Shall we do that now?
OK. So, medical terminology.
Well, my heart sank when I saw that, especially right at the beginning of the course, and I did struggle with it.
I thought it'd be hard, but actually, I found it all quite straightforward. What did you think about diet and nutrition?
OK, I suppose.
Do you remember what they told us about pet food and the fact that there's such limited checking into whether or not it's contaminated? I mean, in comparison with the checks on food for humans, I thought that was terrible.
I think the module that really impressed me was the animal disease one, when we looked at domesticated animals in different parts of the world, like camels and water buffalo and alpaca. The economies of so many countries depend on these, but scientists don't know much about the diseases that affect them.
Yes. I thought they'd know a lot about ways of controlling and eradicating those diseases, but that's not the case at all. I loved the wildlife medication unit. Things like helping birds that have been caught in oil spills. That's something I hadn't thought about before.
Yeah. I thought I might write my dissertation on something connected with that.
Right. So, actually, I was thinking something along the same lines.
Sharpen your skills with this next listening session. Listen closely and snag every new word that floats by. Let's master your vocabulary. Unsheathe your inner voice and practice pronouncing each word. Craft a short sentence to acquire its meaning and lock it in your memory. Let's unleash your vocabulary potential.
London's lipstick red double-decker buses are famous around the world. England's capital has almost 1,000 bus routes, making the red icon a familiar sight to millions of people every day. Powerful symbol of London's identity, the double-decker has kept the city going through wars, economic depressions, and pandemics. When terrorists tried to intimidate Londoners in July 2005, they attacked the heart of the city's daily life, exploding a bomb on a double-decker in Tavistock Square. 13 passengers died, but city life continued. London's first engine-powered double-decker appeared in 1923. Within a year, there were 200 independent buses on the capital's streets, all looking for customers. Among them were double-deckers run by the London General Omnibus Company, which 17 years earlier had decided to paint its buses red to make them stand out from the competition. London's double-deckers became extremely popular with the arrival in 1956 of the Routemaster model designed by the Public Transport Authority, London Transport. Incredibly adaptable, the bus and subsequent models continued to operate in London for almost 50 years. There were many reasons for the Routemaster's popularity. Much of the design was cutting edge, inspired by World War II technology. The interior was more luxurious than the average family car of the 1950s, with padded seats and good ventilation. The famous open-air rear entrance, with its platform and iconic white safety pole, allowed people to jump on and off between stops. The public and tourists alike also had wonderful views of London's famous sights. In 2004 to 2005, the Routemaster in London was replaced by a more modern, safer bus. Over the decades, numerous people had died or suffered serious accidents, jumping on and off the rear platform when the bus was moving. London's double-deckers still carry 2 billion passengers every year, but they now all operate with traditional doors. Those who want to take a historical bus trip into the past should not despair. There is still one Routemaster circulating on a special heritage route in London. Real fanatics can even find buses for sale on eBay at just €20,000 a deck.
You will hear an anthropology student giving a presentation on spiral path designs known as labyrinths.
Labyrinths have existed for well over 4,000 years. Labyrinths and labyrinthine symbols have been found in regions as diverse as modern-day Turkey, Ireland, Greece, and India. There are various designs of labyrinth, but what they all have in common is a winding spiral path which leads to a central area. There is one starting point at the entrance, and the goal is to reach the central area. Finding your way through a labyrinth involves many twists and turns, but it's not possible to get lost, as there is only one single path. In modern times, the word labyrinth has taken on a different meaning and is often used as a synonym for a maze. A maze is quite different, as it is a kind of puzzle with an intricate network of paths. Mazes became fashionable in the 15th and 16th centuries in Europe and can still be found in the gardens of great houses and palaces. The paths are usually surrounded by thick, high hedges so that it's not possible to see over them. Entering a maze usually involves getting lost a few times before using logic to work out the pattern and find your way to the centre and then out again. There are lots of dead ends and paths which lead you back to where you started. The word maze is believed to come from a Scandinavian word for a state of confusion. This is where the word amazing comes from. Labyrinths, on the other hand, have a very different function. Although people now often refer to things they find complicated as labyrinths, this is not how they were seen in the past. The winding spiral of the labyrinth has been used for centuries as a metaphor for life's journey. It served as a spiritual reminder that there is purpose and meaning to our lives, and helped to give people a sense of direction. Labyrinths are thought to encourage a feeling of calm, and have been used as a meditation and prayer tool in many cultures over many centuries. The earliest examples of the labyrinth spiral pattern have been found carved into stone, from Sardinia to Scandinavia, from Arizona to India to Africa. In Europe, these spiral carvings date from the late Bronze Age. The Native American Pima tribe wove baskets with a circular labyrinth design that depicted their own cosmology. In ancient Greece, the labyrinth spiral was used on coins around 4,000 years ago. Labyrinths made of mosaics were commonly found in bathhouses, villas, and tombs throughout the Roman Empire. In northern Europe, there were actual physical labyrinths designed for walking on. These were cut into the turf or grass, usually in a circular pattern. The origin of these walking labyrinths remains unclear, but they were probably used for fertility rites, which may date back thousands of years. 11 examples of turf labyrinths survive today, including the largest one at Saffron Walden, England, which used to have a large tree in the middle of it. More recently, labyrinths have experienced something of a revival. Some believe that walking a labyrinth promotes healing and mindfulness, and there are those who believe in its emotional and physical benefits, which include slower breathing and a restored sense of balance and perspective. This idea has become so popular that labyrinths have been laid into the floors of spas, wellness centres, and even prisons in recent years. A pamphlet at Colorado Children's Hospital informs patients that walking a labyrinth can often calm people in the midst of a crisis. And apparently, it's not only patients who benefit. Many visitors find walking a labyrinth less stressful than sitting in a corridor or waiting room. Some doctors even walk the labyrinth during their breaks. In some hospitals, patients who can't walk can have a paper finger labyrinth brought to their bed. The science behind the theory is a little sketchy, but there are dozens of small-scale studies which support claims about the benefits of labyrinths. For example, one study found that walking a labyrinth provided short-term calming, relaxation and relief from anxiety for Alzheimer's patients. So what is it about labyrinths that makes their appeal so universal?
We'll see you next time for more exciting and helpful videos to help you master your speaking fluency through our listening sessions. Thank you for being with us.